Mataji. Welcome to
Okay.
Blossoming Children. And this channel is created for Sahajogi parents. So it's not for seeker parents, it's specifically designed for Sahajogi parents. And it is starting to evolve. Uh, Mainly because of the desire that yogis had. They reached out to us and they said, continue the conversation, keep talking about children, talk about older children, talk about how we can best raise them with the values that Srimataji instilled in us. And so join me in welcoming Niranjana. She will be joining us and telling us her journey as a mother. So welcome, Niranjana.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been raised in Sahaj Yoga. And of course, when it was my turn to become a mother, I definitely wanted to continue the Sahaj tradition. I am a mother of two. One child is 11 and a half, and the other one is 9 years old. I work for a pregnancy and parenting website. And so my time is split, as most women, between work, household duties, and the children.
So, Niranjana, you mentioned that you were born and raised in Sahaj Yoga. Did you go to the Dharamshala school, and would you like to share something from your time there?
Yes, so when we were children, Sahaj Yoga was still, I mean, it still is today, but it was a much smaller group of people. So my siblings and I and our friends that we grew up with, we were amongst the first batch to go to Rome Ashram and then Dharamsala. And so, of course, the upbringing in those Sahaj schools provided us with a very strong bonding between each other, and definitely the Sahaj values that mother wanted for us. Um, it benefited us in countless ways. And if I look at how things are today, uh, I know that the reality for most parents is that Sahaj schools are not possible. There are very limited number of seats in most of the Sahaj schools. And actually, just like the institution of marriage in Sahaj Yoga, having Sahaj schools is such a founding block that very often they have been the target of a lot of attack. So they face challenges, and I know it's going to take time. We're all building slowly, slowly. Things will set into place, but as of today, it's true that a lot of parents don't have that option. So we have to do as best we can. If, of course, the children can go to Sahaj schools, there's nothing like it, but it's not always possible. And there are other ways of raising children as well.
That is so true that, if more families could have access to Sahaj schools, I'm sure they would take advantage of it. And that's a very valid point. You also mentioned that you work for a parenting and pregnancy website. Do you think there's a very big difference in raising children the Sahaj way and the non Sahaj way? What do you think are the differences?
So parenting under any circumstance is a difficult job. And no parent, knows exactly what they're doing, knows how to handle every situation, gets everything always right. Um, as parents, we grow as we're looking after our children. They teach us a lot, and we make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. But in traditional parenting, there is the um, physical, mental, and emotional aspect of the child that a parent nurtures. So physical is, the shelter, food, clothing. Mental is the education. Emotional is the love and support, the emotional support, raising the child into a strong, emotionally strong person. So in Sahaj parenting, besides the physical, emotional, and mental upbringing of a child, there's also the spiritual upbringing. So there's the spiritual body of the person. And as we know, that is the source of all other aspects. And as a Sahaj parent, our primary responsibility actually is towards that. So of course, whatever manifests on the physical, mental, and emotional side, we know it has its source in the spiritual body of the child. But that is not necessarily, of course, the aspect of a child's life that we spend the most time on, because their other needs are more demanding. However, as a Sahaj parent, that is the added responsibility and our priority.
So, what were some of the things that you and your husband did intentionally when your daughters were little? You said that one is 9 and one is 11. So, how have you intentionally helped the girls develop a meaningful relationship with Shrimatji while, paying attention to their spiritual journey? What are some things that you have found helpful?
So, when a child is born, of course, in most Sahaj families, unrealized children are taking birth. And so they come into this world and, we feel the vibrations are incredibly powerful. They have a strength about them. But that doesn't mean that they're not vulnerable. And as long as they're babies already, they do catch from their surroundings, from their family, and they clear out very, very fast because they don't identify with those catches. So it's very important already, even when they're just babies lying in their cot, we can work on them. And as they grow older, it is, I feel the responsibility of a parent to, be very aware of what is happening with their child vibrationally. What are their catches? What are they struggling with at the moment vibrationally? And till the child is old enough on their own to look after their vibrations. And that happens gradually. It's not a one-day thing. Parents have to actively clear the children out during their meditations, as well as teach them how to feel vibrations and how to clear themselves out so that they feel confident in their own journey and confident in taking their own spiritual ascent into their own hands. So obviously, just like mother does with us, we are our own gurus, and we need to pass that on to our children and let them feel that they are their own gurus and it is their responsibility. But as long as they're small, we really need to look after their vibrations. And children wear their heart out on their sleeves. So as soon as something is bothering them, they cannot hide anger, they cannot hide fear, they cannot hide anything that's passing through their minds or, in their emotions. So that way it's clear to parents that what's happened. And as a Sahaj parent, you can see, okay, my child is a little bit out off balance. And I think, if you look at the physical aspect of the child, when the child is growing up, a baby gets multiple infections when they're growing, no matter how protected you try to keep them. And it's part of growing up. It's a normal part of growing up. In the same way, in the spiritual body, it is absolutely normal for children to get caught up. But just like we care for a child when they're sick, we need to care for a child when we see that they're not quite okay, when we recognize signs that the ego is coming up, when we recognize signs that there's a fear developing. If we let it sit and linger, then for too long, then it starts to become in the child's mind part of their identity. And then the catch settles in more firmly, and it takes more work to clear it out. So if parents are very active, proactive, right from the start in clearing out their children, often through all techniques, And when they're babies, it can be in their cot. As they grow up, it's important to teach them to sit as well for meditation. So it can happen in a natural way, but it is a very important aspect.
So, what I hear you say is that you have to be intentional and you have to clear them out and you have to help them. This is almost like a responsibility to, take ownership of it. What were some things that you were doing with your daughters in your family as a routine or a daily schedule, or how did you weave it into your lives?
So I found it important that children get into the habit of meditation. So we cannot expect children to sit for collective puja or collective meditation if they do not sit at home. So that habit has to be sort of instilled in them. So just like, again, continuing with the analogy of the physical body and the spiritual body, just like you teach your child to brush their teeth, it's something you do every day because it's important for the hygiene of the mouth. In the same way, meditation is something we do every day because it's important to cleanse ourselves from the inside. It's part of our spiritual hygiene. Okay, so it's important to have that right from the beginning. Because if it's left to the choice of the child, sometimes I feel like it, sometimes I don't feel like it, it'll always be very inconsistent. And then as soon as some negativity comes in and makes the child uncomfortable, they'll run away or opt out. So if it is part of their routine, and that's very much something we try to do, that have at least one meditation every single day with the children. And the other thing I noticed is that when meditating with children, especially when they're young, of course, this changes as they grow, but when they're young, it's not possible for the parent to meditate at the same time as the child. So a parent can't sit in silent meditation next to a 2-year-old and expect the 2-year-old to sit and be quiet and not fidget. So what I did is I would have a separate meditation for children. And then after putting them to bed, I would meditate for myself.
Yeah, sometimes we have to do that, right? Otherwise, nobody's getting a meditation. Good point.
Exactly.
What about, you said earlier that when they have emotions and helping them to recognize, to clear themselves out, what were some techniques you used when they got a little bit older? How did you help them to recognize what they're feeling and how to clear out?
So when I was growing up, mother was there in her physical presence. And it was very evident, and it became only more evident as we grew up into adults, the difference in our own vibrational state when we had just been in her presence and when we had spent a lot of time in the normal world. And I used to worry about how that would play out for my children, because they're not going to have that experience. And that was a real worry for a while. And of course, as with everything, I realized that the only thing we can do is create that environment at home, and the rest is in mother's hand. And as parents, to address that concern, what I felt helpful was that prayer of, Mother, they are your children. You look after them. But to help the children themselves develop that relationship to mother and to Sahaj Yoga. So children don't understand Sanskrit. They don't understand mantra. So while it's important to use mantras, of course, in our meditations, something I found very helpful is using prayers or affirmation. And these can be adapted to whatever age the child is. And you can use the language that the child can relate to and understand. But just an example of how it would work out is that if, for example, you're working on your child and you feel that there's a blockage at the level of the heart, so you would tell your child that, repeat after me, Mother Durga, you who sits on a lion, and frightens away all the evil people. Please frighten away my fear. Please take away my fear. And this can be done for each god, where there's a little bit of a description of the god or of the quality of that god or goddess that you see is being attacked or being weakened in the child in that particular center. So if, for example, there's a left nabi and the child can't sit still, and you're working on the child, and you cannot say to the child that put your right hand on your left nabi and say, "Oh, Mother Lakshmi, you who stand on a lotus without falling on the ocean, please give me that balance inside. Please give me that peace inside." So, and what's important with children is not to have a fixed, set way of doing things, to keep it alive, you know. So whatever inspiration comes to you in the moment, whatever prayer comes to you at that time, and then when the child is a little bit older, they start doing it on their own, and they develop their own relationship to that aspect of God. And you know, for example, for Shri Krishna, you who speak so sweetly and who please everyone with your sweet words, please teach me to also speak sweetly. So you know, then there's a connect between behavior, the chakra, and the god that represents that chakra.
I think that's such a sweet way for children to associate that all of these things and qualities, if they desire, they can have. And it's easy to see the connection. Where in the body can I get this security from, and sweetness from, and peace from? I think that is such a sweet way of bringing it to life for children. Did you involve your children in pujas, and how did you teach them techniques, and how did you do that?
So yes, so the thing is, one thing which is always a challenge, and this I saw myself as well growing up, and with all my brothers and sisters that I grew up with, that there comes a point in a child's life where they need to own Sahaj Yoga for themselves, in the sense that they're not doing it just for their parents, they're doing it for themselves. And for that sort of feeling of belonging to come in, of course, the collective is hugely important. But for example, I live in a collective which is so big that there are very few close bonds, because there's so many yogis that it's not the kind of family atmosphere that I was used to growing up. And I see that with my children as well. You know, when we go to national pujas, there are several hundred children there. So, and most of them they're never going to see again, you know. So there's not those interpersonal relationships that existed. But when those can exist, they are a very strong binding force. But besides that aspect, there are things that, you know, definitely we can do with children from the start, and to help them feel that it is their thing, you know. When they're small, they can get involved in cleaning the altar or decorating the altar. Then they can, you know, have their own altar in their bedroom. So for that, they can choose, you know, the altar cloth and which photo Shrimati they would like. Then other ways, as soon as a child can read, for example, my husband gifted them a songbook, so that whenever we go to collective pujas or collective events, they can sing along to the song and read it on their own. And some songbooks even have the meanings of the song, which is better, because then they can relate to the song, they can understand what they're saying. Then at home, also something which is very useful is to encourage children to lead meditation. So after, you know, they grew up seeing you lead the meditation, they can start leading it for themselves, so that they feel that, okay, this is something I can do. And it's, you know, the spur of the moment, the inspiration of the moment. It's not a fixed guideline that you give to your child that always start like this, always finish like this. No, you know, let them be completely spontaneous. And then you can graduate also to leading pujas. And sometimes they get a random wish to do a puja. And even if that doesn't correspond to, a fixed puja date, it would be important, go along with it, even if it takes you by surprise and you're like, preparing that would be, so of course you can then say, okay, let's do it on the weekend, or, you can find a convenient time, but, whenever the children get a sort of inspiration or get a desire to do something related to Sahaj Yoga, it's definitely something to be encouraged.
That is so wonderful. Pearls of wisdom. So, if you had one advice for parents who have younger children than your 9 and 11-year-old that they can do now as they're getting older, what would be something that you would share with them?
Well, definitely, I feel that, of course, my children still have a long journey ahead, and I don't, have the answers to everything, and each age brings up its own challenges. But I think that definitely, something you mentioned in your previous session is that help to call out the thing with the child. So, for example, when they're going through, temper tantrums, then you say, okay, this is Mr. Ego speaking. So as they grow and their emotions become more complex and their reactions become more complex, obviously it's not that you're hovering over them and checking everything, but it's important to continue these discussions and say, well, do you remember when you had this reaction? This is a typical reaction when this center is affected, or if you speak in this manner, you're damaging what it should be, or, so to have these kind of discussions with the child as they grow older, so that they really, it's not just, Sahaj Yoga is not confined to just meditation. It is a way of life. And while, of course, it is normal for children to explore all the range of emotion, they are going to get, they're going to face a lot. But however normal it is to go through it, as spiritual beings, our job is to go above it, is to learn to recognize it, is to learn to work on it, and to eventually go above it. And I know that as adults, we haven't reached there ourselves yet, but it is our duty to pass that, journey on to our children. And once again, bringing in that analogy between the physical and the spiritual body, when so you have infections that all children go through, and that is like negative attack. But you also have vaccination, which is, where you inject a little bit of poison into the body to generate an immune reaction, so that the body is then ready to fight that attack if ever it comes. So similarly, if you look at the spiritual body of the child, sometimes they're subjected to attacks, and they are, the victim of violence or the victim of any kind of vibrational attack. But sometimes they just witness it, or sometimes they enact a behavior that they've seen in other children. So these are kind of like vaccines where they've witnessed that negativity, and it's kind of come into them. It's somewhere in their memory, in their head. And when they enact it, having that discussion with them and saying, okay, this is, this chakra, or this is, not okay for that chakra, or this goes against what Shrimati taught us, and it'll harm you. And having those discussions is important, because what it does is that it shows the child that it creates that distance between that behavior and the child. And it's, as yogis, obviously our identity has to become more and more one with the spirit. But children growing up, obviously, in whatever state we are, our identities are still a sort of mixed bag of our likes, our experiences, our upbringing, and all the rest of it. And children, when they're growing up till the late teenage ages, that identity isn't yet formed. And that is when they are most vulnerable, because if we identify with uh, a weak chakra and say, this is just who I am, then it becomes, then you don't see it. You don't have that distance and you cannot get rid of it. But to continuously say, no, this is not who you are. This is not you. This is, you know, something from outside. This is something you picked up. This is something, let's work it out. Let's clean it, you know. And so that identity doesn't form with those habits or with those reactions.
Beautiful.
There's a
Yes.
lot.
I think your mom gave a very good message of not enabling your children and holding them back, but empowering them so that they can be confident and they can rely on their own judgment. I have to say that these conversations, by no means are we pretending or even saying they're experts. We're just sharing our
Uh,
perspectives. There is no expert parent. Children don't come with a manual.
exactly.
And like you said, Niranjana, we learn to become a mother as the child grows, and with every age we grow into that role. And there's no manual that tells you the next age, read this and then you will have a perfect
Yes.
child. So
Yeah.
these
And each child is different, even within the same house, you know.
yes,
So if you think you figured something out with one, then you have to
yeah,
learn it all over again with the next,
yeah, and
because
something
the
that
same
works for
solutions.
one, yeah, something that works for one doesn't work for the other. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, so these conversations are just our perspectives, and we're just sharing what has worked for our perspective. So if you liked this, like and subscribe. That way you'll be alerted when the new video gets uploaded. The channel is called Blossoming Children, and a Sahaj way of raising children with Sahaj values. That's what it is. And so thank you for joining and hope to see you the next.
Thank you for, yes, thank you for having this channel. I think we can all learn so much from each other. It's always interesting to hear from other Sahaj parents, you know, what's working for them, and pick up from there, you know, things we can apply to ourselves. So thank you for having this platform and enabling this dialogue. I'm sure at least I find it helpful, and I hope others do too.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been a joy talking to you, and I wish you all the best in your mothering journey. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.